Those of you who are staying here, let's go to Daniel chapter 2 as we get started. If you didn't get the notes, they're at the back door. By the way, if you didn't pick up communion elements, for those of you who aren't in choir, we have them in the foyer. You can help yourself to those so you're ready to go when we do our service this morning. Here, let's just get started as you're going. Name something a car salesman hopes does not happen when a customer takes a test drive. Car dies, an accident. Anything else? Yeah, here we go. A flat tire, getting in a police chase, run out of fuel, car breaks down, car crash. Number one, they take off with the car. That would make sense. Okay, name something only an idiot driver would do if the police car was right behind him. Speed up. What else do you have? I heard speed up. What's that? Hit the brakes, slam on the brakes, yeah. Here's what I said: throw litter out the window, swerve across the right line, slam on the brakes, use the cell phone, run a red light, etc., etc. Name an animal that begins with the letter C. Cat, cougar, crocodile, camel. Yeah, here we go. Coyote, cheetah, camel, cougar, cow. Number one was cat. And some brave folk run with the bulls. You ever see this? Okay. So for those of us who aren't brave, what would we feel comfortable running with? What kind of an animal? Turtles. Run with dogs. Goldfish. We're getting worse as we go along. Rabbits, chickens, horses, turtles was up there, by the way. Cats and dogs and puppies was number one. Name a godly man in the Old Testament. Never guess which one's number one. Daniel's number one. You got any others? David, Noah, John. Okay, Joseph. You got a whole bunch of them. Let's hit into Daniel. We're in Daniel in chapter 2. Okay, let's set the scene for what's happening in Daniel chapter 2. Actually, we're gonna jump into part of where we were last week. The book opens. The Jewish people are captives, headed for Babylon. They're going to be invaded, the Jewish people, 3 phases. Daniel's taken in the first phase, along with his friends, which was in 605, and their hostages going to be converted into what we would call Chaldeans, or what later becomes known as the wise men, the Magi. So even though men are taken out of the promised land, these teenagers, the Lord God stays in their heart. Chapter 1, they're given food that they're supposed to eat, and they say, no, this is non-kosher food. It's against the law. We won't eat it. We're going to follow the Lord our God, even though we're in a culture that is trying to convince us he doesn't exist. So they remain faithful. Even though they remain faithful, it doesn't get any better for them. It gets worse. Chapter 2, what happens in the chapter, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that keeps on recurring. It bothers him, disrupts his sleep. And so as a result, he demands of the wise men that they tell him the interpretation of the dream, but it makes it a little bit harder. Not only does he want them to tell him the interpretation, tell him the dream itself. And so they were, and he says, if you don't do this, you're going to be cut in pieces and your houses are going to be made like outhouses. And so what happens is the wise men, they say, hey, listen, we'll interpret it, but we want you to do what? First tell us the dream, as you just mentioned. How does Nebuchadnezzar respond? What does he say when they say, tell us the dream? Does he say, yeah, I'll do that? He refuses to do that, and he insists that they make known unto him both the dream and the interpretation, okay? And then it goes on, the wise men said, this is impossible for who to do? Any man. It's impossible for any man to do, which, by the way, is these guys, as we said last week, that was not the right answer for them to give, since they claimed that ability and power all along. But now they admit they can't do it. And so the enraged king orders all of the what? To what? All the wise men to, okay, let's wipe them all out. We're going to execute them, all of them right now. And so that includes even Daniel and his friends, who had nothing to do with this episode up to this point. And so what happens is when Daniel and his friends, when the chief executor comes to the door, he knocks or whatever, barges in, and Daniel says, okay, why is this happening? He explains to Daniel what's going on, and Daniel it's arranged, he goes to the king, and he asks the king to do what? Give him some time, because if you give me some time, I'm going to pray and we're going to find out if I can interpret the dreams. And so he says that in faith. He says to the king, I'll tell you the dream. Then he goes back and says, we got to pray. And so the three friends, he and his three friends get together, and they immediately prayed for the Lord to answer. And we ended up with this thought, that it says they prayed, and then they get an answer. Daniel gets an answer in the night visions, which is the idea that either they prayed for a long time, or in faith, they go to sleep, and then the vision comes to them at the end. Here's what happens then. Let's pick it up, okay? So we go on and we read in verse 19. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Daniel immediately does what? He goes to the king. Is that the first thing he does? Okay, no. He blesses God. Now, I want you to catch a few things. Just look at how he responds here. He blessed the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times of the seasons. He removes the kings and set up kings. So we have Daniel's prayer quoted here. What he's sharing as he's talking, he says he gives wisdom to the wise, knowledge to them that know understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells in him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers, who have made me, has given me wisdom and might, and you have made known unto me now what we desired of you, for you have made known unto us the king's matter. Therefore, Daniel then goes to Arioch, and he says, take me to the king, and he goes in and then he gets the king. Let's stop right here at this spot, because immediately Daniel responds with praise and thanksgiving. I didn't get to this spot last week, but I want to just take it for us. Okay, before he goes to the king, his very first reaction, remember there's a time frame that has to be done here. His first reaction is praising. Okay, and we pointed out that in any crisis, you got to respond with poise, propriety, the way he spoke to the rulers, with prayer, and then with praise. This is how we should respond to this week's crises, whether it be a car, whether it be an appliance going down, whether it be a health issue. We should make this a practice in our life to respond with poise, propriety, prayer, and praise. And so when you look at Daniel's prayer, what stands out to you from his prayer? Anything that we just prayed, or we just read? Anything about that prayer that stands out? What's that? Oh, yeah, it's just focused on praising God. Praising God. Anything else that stands out? Yeah. There's several things that strike me. One, he praises God personally. He doesn't just talk about it, he actually does it, okay? There are times that people talk about prayer, they talk about praise, and it's a thing we encourage, but doing it is another thing, that taking the time. So he personally he did it immediately after he gets the interpretation. He doesn't know what's coming yet. Okay, so you know the interpretation, and you know the rest of the story, but from Daniel's perspective, what does Daniel not know? He's got the dream and he's got the interpretation, but what's the big element here that's unknown? The outcome, okay? How the king is going to react to this dream, because this dream is not flattering to the king, okay? And so he's gonna basically, when he goes to tells the king, who, remember, the king the people consider him a divine being and in total control. What's Daniel's gonna, when he interprets the dream, what's that gonna say? You're not in control. Who is? The real God, not you. And he's gonna make it very clear. You are just you are in God's hands in this scheme of things. You're just one of the many elements that God was working through. And so Daniel doesn't know. Giving me this dream and telling it to the king, is this thing going to get worse? My life is already threatened. Chances could be the king could still kill him. Okay, but he's giving praise, which I find very interesting. Ken? Yeah. He gives thanks for it. Okay, who does he sound like later on in the story? Do you remember his three friends? How did they respond? Okay, when they're ready to go into the fiery furnace, what's their reaction? whether or not we survive, we still give God the glory. Even if we don't survive. And so here's parts of that I think it's really interesting. Is in his praise, do you notice when in this praise he says, "Thank you for giving me the interpretation in the dream"? Is it the first thing he gives thanks for? No. What does he focus on first of all? Who God is. You know what it reminds me of? Do you remember Jesus says, "Pray after me in this manner? Our Father who..." Right? There's a whole first section here of praise and worship before he says, "Oh, by the way, thank you for providing my job, giving this answer to this." He's praising God. And when he's praising and giving glory to God, he's thanking God for these types of things. God, you possess wisdom and might. He thanks God because you're in control of the times and the seasons. He's giving praise that you control men's affairs. And in this moment, kings are raised and taken down. You give wisdom to the wise, knowledge and understanding. He gives praise to God for this idea. You reveal secret truths, deep truths that man cannot understand by themselves. You know the darkness when we can't see. You totally are in control. Everything, God, you are sovereign. Isn't that an interesting way to pray? Is before you jump into request or before you jump into your element, just worship. Just give him worship and just talk about how he is. And then he does. He says, "You gave me the wisdom. You know in me. You have made known the king's dream. Thank you, thank you, thank you," is where he's going with this. And so I have to ask myself this question. Is this the way we praise? Is this the way we worship? Often we are so focused on our individual requests, that's all we see. And Daniel is saying, why don't you take a bigger picture and remind yourself who God is. God is in control. No matter what the outcome is going to be, our God is still on the throne. Okay, and so he's praising God. And by the way, isn't this the reason we exist? Is to give God the glory. I was reading a story in a history about a guy who was put on this in charge of a lighthouse, and they would bring, because they were in an island area, they would bring fuel for the lighthouse once a month. And he was given in charge, and he was told, use the oil that we provide for the lighthouse for the lighthouse. Well, he's there, and the neighbors, things are happening. Neighbors come knocking on the door and say, "Hey, we only need a little bit of fuel oil. We need it for our lamps. We need it for our stove, just a little bit." And so what happens is he can't turn anybody down, and by the end of the month, what can you figure is going to happen? He runs out before they come to resupply, and wouldn't you know, he's run out of fuel. Several days early, a ship crashes. It's wrecked. When they do the inquiry, they find out that the lighthouse wasn't aflame because he gave it out. And the inquiry's response was, even though you were a nice guy, you had one sole purpose for that fuel. And it was to do what? Keep the light. We have one primary purpose in this life. It's to give glory to God. Okay? And so we need to remember that. And what happens here in this story is, you've got to consider this kid is 18, 19 years old. And he's acting with this maturity spiritually. Good guy. Good guy. Okay, so he goes to the king and he tells the king what's going on. And so we talked about this last week where it says Arioch, he went to Arioch, verse 24, whom the king had already told to destroy all the wise men. In the middle of verse 24, he went and said to him, "Destroy not the wise men, bring me in before the king. I will show you the king and the interpretation." And again, I remind you, if you weren't here last week, we made this observation that it is the providential care of God to have brought Arioch to Daniel's door, because Arioch is going to be the one that gets Daniel to the king in this spot. Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said unto him, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation." The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof?" Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, and it's important that in verse 27 he sets the scene, that this is what Daniel says in front of the king. Okay, so he's telling us that he's hinting at what Daniel is going to say. You might think, but typically people wouldn't say it out loud before the king. Do you catch what's going on here? God wants to emphasize Daniel said this out loud. Do you ever have conversations in your brain that you don't say out loud? Okay, he's saying this guy did say it out loud, and there's a reason for it. So here he goes. He says, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king? The king knows that. Okay, that's already been proven. But there is a God in heaven that reveals the secrets and makes known to the king of Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of in your head upon your bed are these. As for you, king, thy thoughts come unto thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. He has revealed the secret things, made known unto thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any other living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that you might know the thoughts of thy heart. What in that complexity of words, what does Daniel say that kind of strikes you as, wow, that's pretty good? Okay. He's obviously got concern for everybody else. By the way, could he have kept quiet longer and let the rest of the wise men get wiped out? Yeah. Okay. What were you going to say? In an impolite way? He's very direct. He's very direct. Again, he's speaking with propriety. He doesn't call the king an idiot, though is the king an idiot in some of his religious beliefs. We would agree with that. Okay. Ken?
In verse 25, the king says, I have done this particular thing. And Daniel, in these latter verses, says that God has given this interpretation. No man can do it.
Yeah, so there is no doubt here, Daniel is pointing the king to who? To God. And he's saying to the king, who's in control? Right? There's no doubt about that. That's an amazing statement from a 19-year-old kid to this king who, as far as everybody knows, he's in charge of everything in that area. And so Daniel's just basically telling him in a direct, indirect, but fashion, you're not as powerful as you think you are. Yeah, take that, boss. Yeah, that you're not the boss. Anything else strike you about Daniel? He's not building himself up. Could he? Was the slide set, or the skid set for him to be built up? Watch how he's introduced. Isn't this interesting? Arioch brings him in and says, I have found a man of the captives that will make known unto the king the interpretation. And so the king's asking, can you really do this? The scene was set for Daniel to even say, yeah, I can do this. I got it within me. What stands out to you for a 19-year-old? What character trait? What virtue stands out here? Humility. His humility. He makes it clear that any of his insight comes from the Lord. He makes it clear, okay, that it wasn't just me who prayed. God gave the interpretation to us. He's bringing his friends in, okay? He's giving credit where credit is due. It's God. Several of us were involved. Not just me, but several of us were involved. And so he's if he had claimed the credit to himself, he could have set himself up as a real controller of the king. He doesn't do it. There's a posture of humility here. I think the other virtue that stands out is his boldness. He makes it clear that God is real and powerful in front of this anti-God crowd, a crowd that is already biased. And remember this setting. What do they think about Jehovah God? The Babylonians, what is the court mentality towards the Jewish God? They beat him in battle. So if we beat you in battle, our gods are more powerful. And he's saying, actually, the God who is the most powerful that can do this is our God, which is a bold statement to a king and people who attribute some divinity to the king. This is amazing. This guy of 19 has humility with boldness. Take your hats off and say. So in his opening remarks, he tells them, okay, and this is important. Now, this isn't the dream itself, but these are some of the setting of the scene. He's telling him the dream and the interpretation come from God. King, I want you to understand. And he rehearses this. The dream and the interpretation are from God. And he rehearses it a couple times. They tell the future. I'm giving you future history of what's going to happen here and it's absolutely true. He's going to conclude with this. The interpretation of the dream, this is for certain. This is not something that can be changed. This is what God has intended for the future. So he's telling the king this, and then he set the scene. He's given his opening introduction, and then he goes and jumps into the dream itself. He says, "Thou, O king, you saw and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. You saw this image standing until a stone that was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake it to pieces. Then was the iron, clay, brass, silver, gold broken to pieces, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream that you saw. We will now tell you the interpretation thereof before the king." So let's just pause. Here's what he's got: a great statue of a man. Okay? This statue is huge. And in the wording that's there, and some of you have different translations, it's exceedingly bright. Okay? It's brilliant. Okay? Its effect was, in the King James I just read, it says its effect was terrible. Anybody have another translation for the last words in verse 31? Dazzling? Okay. It's the idea that it is so awesome it is frightening. It is like that when sometimes when people see the Lord. What was the reaction of some of the saints when they saw the Lord, or even one of his angels? Okay, they fall down in mixture of awe and... Okay, so this is what he's saying. The statue has this effect upon people. And so he goes and he starts from head to foot, and he tells the statue. The dream concludes with what coming down? What comes down, not made with men's hands? A stone, okay? If it's not made with men's hands, what's that imply? Okay, it's a God thing. It's a God thing, okay? And it's coming down, and it's this heavenly stone that strikes the statue. And what happens to the statue? Okay, destroys it, okay? And he says that what is left of the statue, after it's blown to bits by this rock from the sky, what happens to the residue? Not the stone, the statue. Okay, it talks about the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, that they're all in pieces, and they become like something. They become, what's chaff? Okay, so if we're out in the field and we're threshing back in olden days, we have the wheat and everything, and you throw it up in the air, and the chaff blows away, okay, and the kernels... they fall down. Okay, so you got the chaff is basically waste, residue. What happens to this? The gold, silver, everything that's become like chaff. It all blows away. It's gone. It's gone. That's very important in the interpretation. Okay, so keep it in mind. And then the stone grows into a mountain that goes how big? Okay, it fills the entire earth, okay? So that's the dream that we got. Now he jumps right into it. He says, okay, here's your interpretation, O king. And as you go through this, keep this in mind, okay? As we go down through the statue, we're descending through what? We're going through human history. Okay, from the time of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to go all the way down until what event? Oh, let's see in a second. Okay, and so we're going through human history. Each section of the statue represents a different what? Do you remember any of this? Okay, not a time period. A time period kind of, but they represent more specifically. Okay, different empires. What we're going to call worldwide empires. And you who know much more about the world than Daniel and his people did, okay? When we think worldwide empires, we might throw in China. We might throw in something from from South America. Let's talk about major empires. Who is this book written from whose perspective? What group of people is this about? The Jews. The Jews. And so when they're talking in this, are there other empires around the world? Yes, but which ones affect the Jews? That's what's in this story. Okay, is what's surrounding Jewish history and their future. Because you and I all know that the Messiah is going to come through which group of people? The Jews. Okay, so when you're interpreting anything in this dream, keep in mind the perspective is Middle Eastern Jewishness. And that's where they're from, because they're talking about what affects their world in that sense. So it is from a Jewish perspective. Daniel identifies how many empires that have major effect upon the Jews. Okay, there's four clearly, and kind of like the one is being redone. Okay, we'll see it unfold. But they have major impact. Here they are, okay? The head of gold that he talks about, he interprets it, where he says, this is the dream, we'll give you the interpretation, verse 36. Verse 37, who's the head of gold? Which empire? Okay, he says, you, O king, are the King of kings. You're the God of heaven, has given you. And again, notice what he says. You didn't get this empire on your own. Catch what he's saying to the king. The king who is later on going to say, look at all that I have done. Okay? This king's a proud man. And what's Daniel in graciousness but in directness saying to him? God is still in charge. You're not in charge. Anyway, Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian empire, and so we have the dates of it. The head of this thing is like, okay, there's the strength. This is what's really the pinnacle of all these empires. So we give you a little bit of the history of what's going on with Nebuchadnezzar, and understand he was a tyrant. He was a despot in a way that he was in total control. Okay, he was absolutely, from his perspective, he was the sovereign of the empire, and everybody saw him that way. Daniel's going to say, "You're the sovereign under God." And so, why do they use gold as the imagery? Why did God do that? I'll give you several suggestions. Okay, number one, he's starting off with, this is probably of all these empires, this one's probably has the richest history, the strongest administration. In fact, let's go a little bit more into some history. Their god, Marduk, was their chief god. He is also called the god of gold. In their own writings, they call him the god of gold. Okay. As well, Herodotus, when he comes in and he tours Babylon, he writes about it 90 years later, and he's writing about it, and he says that this city is just filled with just amounts of gold that are just phenomenal. That was it. Isaiah even calls Babylon the city of gold. So you go through scripture and you go through history and you say, okay, Babylon's known for its great wealth and power for its gold. Okay, so that makes sense that God would say, I'm going to use this to identify you because this is how you identify yourself and many others. So then he goes from there and he says, there's going to be another kingdom after Babylon. Now remember, he's telling the king this. By telling him there's another kingdom after yours, what does that just say to the king? Your empire's not lasting. Okay? If somebody says to you, the United States isn't going to last another 50 years, most of us would respond and say, wait a minute. Wait a minute. That may be true, but... And so what happens here is he's telling this to the king, who is trying to set up an everlasting type of a kingdom. He's saying it's not everlasting. It's not going to last. Remember, now, the empires are set with the idea that we are never going to fade away. He says there's going to be another empire. It's going to rise. And he says it's going to come. And this one is this part of the body. So it's one, and yet it has two major elements to it, or parts to it. Two separate parts. It follows Babylon in the course of history. We know from history, and we know from other interpretations that are come later in the book, he's talking about how you, Babylon, are going to fall to the Medo-Persians. That's the next empire in history. The Medo-Persians come in, and before the book ends, they invade and take over Babylon, and Daniel starts working for a whole new administration, the Medo-Persians. So in this interpretation, we get the idea that this is the group that's going to sink the unsinkable Titanic of that day, Babylon. And so they're going to come along, and they're going to rule the Middle East for 200 years. Now, the question is, why did they use silver? Why does God use it to describe this kingdom? And we say, okay, silver is still, it's a precious metal, but compared to gold, it's less. Yay? If you studied the market this morning, silver prices are less than gold prices for the same amount. Okay, Medo-Persians use silver as the basis of their currency, okay, that we know from history. Their leadership, in the sense, was a good leadership, but it wasn't as powerful as Babylon. The way they administered, there were some weaknesses there that weren't as strong as the Babylonians. And so it becomes a very large empire, but it doesn't last. Then he goes on, he says, there's going to come after them another empire. And again, later on, he's going to identify this in a future reference. He's going to make sure that you know that it's Greece. He's going to mention Greece later on in the book of Daniel. And so he mentions them. Here he says in verse 39, and after you another kingdom inferior to you, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule. Oh, by the way, going back to Medo-Persia, Medo-Persia was actually two people groups, the Medes and the Persians, who united together to fight Babylon. So that's where you get those two sources, but they unite together. Here you got the belly and the thighs of brass or bronze, whichever one your interpretation may mean. We're talking basically the same. It's a stronger metal than the previous two metals when it comes to warfare, when it comes to battle, okay, using it as a weapon, though its value is less. And this is all, everything is declining. All these kingdoms are less in value and the way they work. The idea of the belly and the thighs may be this: the empire starts off, with the torso here, one, but then it divides, and he's only going this far down. So it divides into two. So it's just the opposite of two becoming one. This one is one that'll become two. And so he's pointing out that what's going to happen. And so what we know from history, and again later on, it'll be identified with Greece in chapter 8, I believe it is, or 11. It says the history is going to teach us that the next major empire in this area is the Greek Empire. They take over from the Medo-Persians. And who was the guy who led the Greek Empire into its glory days? Okay, you know him. You've read about him. Okay, so he conquers the world. It's interesting that God, using these metals, it's the Greeks that use bronze as their primary metal for their weapons, identifying them, okay, that they did it with their helmets and all. And so we know when they came into power, and we have this major, large empire. It becomes the largest that the world has ever seen up to that point, and yet it is much weaker. If you read anything about Alexander, he was great for coming in and setting up stuff real quick, but the governments he set up, they didn't last hardly at all. They were very poorly established. Even when he came in and set up city governments, he redid their quote unquote constitutions, different things like that. And within just a short time, like Napoleon, things fell apart very quickly after him. And so it's weaker in that regard. When Alexander died, he had no heir, supposedly at this point. He had no heir. What happened to his kingdom? On his deathbed, he says, the strongest of you to his four generals, you're going to take over. So he didn't appoint a singular leader on his deathbed. And so the four of the generals decided, rather than go to civil war, we'll just divide the empire between us. And so they divided it, and it goes into four. But this interpretation starts off with one and goes to two. But history says they went into four. So is God wrong? The answer is no. But how do we reconcile this? Whose perspective is this written about? The Jews. How many of these broken down, the divisions affect the Middle East? Two. Okay, because if you see on the map, the other two are far north. They really have no play into Israel's history for a long time. They're just they flayed out. But the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, they're going to be influencing Israel for the next 200-300 years. In fact, there's a guy who is called Antiochus Epiphanes. He comes from the Seleucids. And he gets right into the middle of Israel and even goes into the temple and does what? We talked about this just a couple weeks ago. He commits the abomination of desolation, and he tries to take out the Jewish religion. He sacrifices a pig on the altar. So the Seleucids and Ptolemies, they're going to be competing against each other. And when they go into battle against each other, where do they march? Do you see the blending of their two empires? Who's right in the middle there? Israel. So Israel is going to play host to their marching armies for the next 200-300 years. And they're going to be the ping pong that's going back and forth. Who's controlling us? And so from that perspective, this makes perfect sense. Okay, who's affecting you Jews at this point? Babylon, Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia is the ones that are going to get back into the land. Greece and its empire that divides into two, you're going to be persecuted by these two elements. And then he goes a step further. And so Israel in history, they're going to get a little bit of a free period in here, but it's not going to last hardly at all. And so eventually after the Assyrians, there's another kingdom that comes. After Greece, there's another kingdom that's going to really affect Israel. This other kingdom is going to last a whole lot longer. It's made of iron, but it's mixed with clay and other elements. The iron is very strong, okay? But what does clay do when it's mixed with iron? Okay, you're going to make it weaker, okay? So as time passes, these two units, okay, and it's going to be the two elements that iron and clay that are mixed together, that it's going to affect them, these legs, and for a number of years. In time, this kingdom mixes with clay as it gets to the feet, and then it talks about the 10 toes, and then it talks about this kingdom is lasting until the stone comes out of heaven and crushes everything. So that's why I make this comment that this last kingdom has kingdom number 4 into kingdom number 5. And it's going to be a blend, and it's going to last, but it's losing some of its identity because it's mixing, but it keeps some of its identity because there's still some of the iron, but it's getting weaker over a period of time. So we look at it and we say, okay, which empire followed and took over Israel? And they were in charge by the time Jesus comes. It's the Romans. And the Romans, they were the ones that introduced iron and steel in their weaponry, which were the invincible weapons, if you would, okay, that keep on going. They expanded this huge. They rule over a large mass, but as they're ruling, they start an eclectic system. They start mixing in, and initially they're dominating those that they conquered. But over a period of time, they're taking the people that they conquered and they're blending their ideas and their deities and their philosophies into themselves. And as a result, they become weaker in their control as time goes by. Even though, if you remember in history, they're trying to dominate and keeping control initially, over a period of time they get very, very weak because they're just, that eclecticism, that mixing, just kind of, it ruins them over a period of time. And they last all the way until that their influence, their kingdom lasts all the way until the stone comes from heaven. And the question that, and we're going to jump ahead in the interpretation, the stone that comes from heaven is going to be God setting up his kingdom on earth. The stone is Jesus Christ coming to set up his kingdom. Okay? So you got to be thinking this, if you're still awake, you got to be thinking that how is it we're saying the Roman Empire still has its control and influence, or has the king, up to now, either that part is flawed and Jesus is still coming back, or maybe the answer is he already set up his kingdom on earth. With the end of the Roman rule, Jesus Christ and the kingdom on earth is here already. Are we living in the kingdom? Oh, you don't think so? Okay. So here's where it gets a little bit hairy. Rome fell after hundreds of years, okay? And all of the others were consecutive in their rise and fall. So how can this be accurate? And some say, oh, Jesus is referring to setting up a spiritual kingdom that he established towards the end of the Roman age, and it became Christendom, and it's only talking about a spiritual kingdom. Therefore, that this interpretation is, this makes it correct and it's okay. And I respond and say, yes, Jesus did set up a spiritual influence, but when you look at this, you say, okay, the prophecy is about real physical kingdoms. Every one of them is about real physical kingdom. That's what the Jews have been looking for. That's what they wanted Jesus to set up, this real physical kingdom. All the others in this thing were real physical kingdoms. In my mind, he's not talking about a spiritual kingdom, even though Jesus established a spiritual influence of Christianity. Yes? Okay, Christianity there's still a kingdom aspect that's coming. And so we say, well, then if that's the case, how can you say there is still the influence, or the Rome is still having control and influencing what's going on to Israel? Well, there's this fourth kingdom that's divided, that has two elements to it, maybe phase one, phase two. Okay? Rome did divide in history between an East and a Western empire, and they lasted for a long time. The Eastern Empire lasted longer than the Roman Empire did. And in these final phases, it gets down to 10 toes, mixed a lot with clay. And then we jump into other prophecies that talk about, the Roman influence. And here's where I understand this interpretation. Rome's influence is still with us today. Okay, in America. We are very romantic, not the emotions, but our languages are very Romanish. Our judicial system is very Romish. Our legislative process is very Roman. In fact, we have one part of the government that's the same the Rome had, a Senate. Okay? It's very, very, we are, in a lot of sense, we are very Western, based on what happened and came out of Rome. And so a lot of everything, Rome's influence is still there. The vestiges of Roman Empire is very strong. We don't have as much of the Greek, the Babylonian, the Persian. Rome's influence is huge, even in a lot of what's going on. And other prophecies support this idea that the 10 toes that are mentioned here, there's going to be 10 elements, 10 influential groups of people that are going to be there and functioning in that same realm where the Roman Empire was, and they're going to form a confederation. Do you remember what other book talks about these 10 toes forming a group? The book of Revelation, that they form this confederacy. And it's in the same region that the Roman Empire was. And so this prophecy is just accurate as you go through history, and then you come to this point. You come to the stone. And the stone that comes, and remember it's not a human kingdom. This is critical in this whole account. The stone is not made with hands, okay? The idea is that people aren't going to bring about this kingdom. I don't care what the different groups of theology say. We are not supposed to get the world socially prepared, and when we get the world good enough, then Jesus is going to come back. One, that's not our call of God is not to clean up society. Our call from God is not to get rid of poverty. Our call from God is to do what? Preach the gospel, okay? So number one, we have a duty to preach the gospel, and it can impact and do good things. Don't get me wrong, but our goal is to preach the gospel. Number two, we're not strong enough to bring in Christ's kingdom and clean up this world, okay? It's just not going to be possible. The statue breaks up everything. What is left of it, remember, is carried away with the wind. In other words, all those human governments and all their influence, when Jesus sets up his kingdom, they're gone. We're not going to say to Jesus, by the way, when we were in America, here's how we used to do things. Maybe you should consider it. It's not going to happen. He's not going to need our experiences on how to run the world. And so what happens, it grows into a mountain that fills the earth. This is really interesting. If you were the king of Babylon, this phrase would catch your attention, that this mountain would fill the earth. And if you were standing there in one of the courtiers in Nebuchadnezzar's chambers, and you heard this stone growing into a mountain, you all of a sudden you're going ding, 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 for this reason. Their theology included mountains. Okay? Let me show you what I mean by that. In Babylonian theology, their gods reside in the mountains. Okay? In their theology, they made their temples to look like mountains. We call them pyramids type things. That's the way they did their worship. In their worship, this stone growing into this mountain is like, this is a deity that is going to be more powerful than any of our deities who reside in the mountains. So it's an interesting thought that he goes on, he says in verse 44, this is the God of the heavens, and he's bringing his kingdom. And so what does it all mean? The stone and the mountain represent the kingdom of heaven. It's not coming by human effort. Should we try to be influential in our society? Yes. But not to the extent that we forget getting out the gospel. And by the way, even if we cleaned up America, does that mean everybody's going to heaven? Let me put it this way. We are offended by what's happening in our society. Transgender, homosexuality, be presented as the norm. Yes? Okay. Does that mean if we got rid of it, we would be more Christian? Here's Russia and the Islamic states. Do they allow open homosexuality and transgenderism? Are you going to tell me just because they cleaned up their society that way that they're Christian? So in our focus, we want morality, but just cleaning up morality is not the answer. Does that make sense? We can become very conservative, and still people with their great conservatism are lost. Does that make sense? Okay. And so, again, I'm not advocating that we just say, oh, let's let evil run rampant. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we've got to keep the right perspective as born-again believers. To make a lasting impact, it's the gospel. It's not just conservatism. It's not the Republican Party only. It's not preaching morality. Does that make sense? We've got to preach Christ, and you must be born again. That's got to be our primary message. I mean, I'm all for those other things to say, okay, we want to have that influence, but let's not forget that reaching America is not just cleaning up the streets. It's cleaning up the hearts. So with that in mind, okay, it does not adapt or adopt systems from the previous ones. This kingdom will fill the entire earth. It's going to last forever. It's going to be the kingdom that will last, and it's still future to our day. Okay, that's where we're at in this whole study. So what does it all mean right up to this point? Okay, let's just draw these conclusions right now. The Jews would never again be an independent, powerful nation until Messiah comes. Yes, they're going to become independent for a little bit, but they're not going to be powerful influences on the Middle East pre-Roman. Yes, they're independent right now, and they're a role player, but they're not compared to when David and Solomon were in charge. They're not the ones. Their restoration is going to come when Jesus Christ comes. Okay? Gentile nations will dominate their political scene from Daniel's day all the way until Christ comes. Even if they have some independence, even if they are like today, the Gentiles are going to be more dominating what's going on there. Okay? The Gentile empires over them will be many and more diverse as time goes by. Not just under one, they're going to be under many different Gentiles' control and influences. These major empires get weaker over time. Even the inferior ones will overcome the superior ones. All these major empires, they're going to be destroyed in time. They're going to be taken away, no matter what. And again, I am very pro-America, but America is not God's chosen kingdom, okay? And we're not an eternal kingdom, okay? I hope it lasts for a long, long time, but no nation will last forever except for the kingdom of God, okay? So what does it mean about God? It means this. God is in control of human history on the big scale. And you want to know where it falls? On the pew scale. He's in control of your history. He's that powerful. He takes an active role in what happens. Eventually, he will set up a real physical kingdom. Okay? It's going to be spiritual. It's going to be great in all aspects. Mankind cannot introduce it, cannot initiate this kingdom. Christ alone will bring it in. This kingdom will be greater than any other kingdom ever seen. It will be limited. It's going to be worldwide, but it's going to be limited. What do we mean by it's limited? Who's going to be allowed in it? Anyone? Okay. Unless a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Except a man be born again, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. You must be, okay, in order to be a part of that kingdom. Let's get ready.